Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to welcome you to the Polish Institute of International Affairs. My name is Jarosław Ćwiek, Karpowicz. I'm director of this institute. We have no doubt that the conference is organized in a very specific and right moment. Russia adopted quite recently a new doctrine where is indicating very clearly that historical policy is a tool of foreign security policy, and we are very much aware that for many years Russia is interpreting history in a very specific way, focusing on the Second World War, the memory of the Great Patriotic War in Russian terminology, blaming Poland and other Eastern European nations for collaboration and initiating the whole crisis at that time, and using a very specific parallel, the time where Russia or Soviet Union was fighting with Nazi Germany. Now is the same situation, according to Russian propaganda, is taking place in Ukraine, where Russian army is fighting against so-called Nazi Ukraine. So that's why we have many reasons why we should focus very carefully on Russian propaganda and this parallel between the historical policy and current situation. At this point, I would like to thank the director of German Historical Institute, Madam Magdalena Saryusz-Wolska, for initiating this project. And I'm very proud that PISM was selected as a main partner for this event. And I really hope that my team, especially Ania Dyner, our security expert, head of security program at PISM, will contribute significantly in this event. I would also like to thank today's speakers for accepting our joint invitation. Every day we see how important it is to combat Russian disinformation, including in the historical sphere. This is why your research is so important. So without further ado, I would like to wish you once again a very fruitful discussion, good conference, and now pass the floor to Madam Director. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also a warm welcome from myself. As mentioned, my name is Magdalena Saryusz-Wolska. I'm the director of the German Historical Institute in Warsaw. And for those of you who don't know the institute yet, let me start with a short information on who we are. The GHI Warsaw is part of the Max Weber Foundation, which is a German public foundation running 12 at the moment. 11 research institutes and some other offices worldwide. In total, we are represented in almost 20 sites on 4 continents, because some institutes have also branches. We, as the Institute in Warsaw, have a branch, for example, in Prague and Vilnius. We conduct basic research regarding the regions in which we are placed, and we undertake many activities to intensify the knowledge transfer to and from Germany. And this is also the case of the Institute in Warsaw. We've been here for more than 30 years now, and we conduct research projects on Polish and East Central European history, but we also publish translations from and into Polish and German. We organize public lectures and events like this. Since 2009, the GHI has been organizing the so-called level debates, so public discussions on relevant topics from historical sciences and other close disciplines, and they are called after Joachim Lelevel, a Polish historian from the 19th century, who was also a very international person. For the first time, however, we organized this event with an external partner, and I think that the topic of today's debate obviously is an obvious reason why we have chosen the Polish Institute for International Affairs as our partner, and we are very glad that the Polish Institute for International Affairs agreed to cooperate. We cannot imagine a more competent partner for the current topic on mnemonic security and international relations. As I myself come from memory studies, this is also a very important topic to me. For many years, I had the feeling that memories is a quite abstract and theoretical phenomenon, useful maybe for people working in museums or other cultural institutions, sometimes used and abused by politicians. However, until 2022, I would never have thought of memory as something that might be relevant in a military context, and apparently I was wrong. So I'm very happy that extremely competent and distinguished guests accepted our invitation and will discuss these issues during the next 2 hours, 2.5. However, events like this do not fall from the sky. Someone needs to organize them, and it was not me, who wrote all the emails, invitations, or descriptions and thought of all organizational details. I would like to thank Dr. Bartosz Dziewanowski-Stefańczyk from the German Historical Institute in Warsaw, whose idea it actually was to focus this level debate on the topic of mnemonic security. I will only mention that Bartosz is currently working on a collective volume on disinformation in memory politics that will be published next year, and I'm quite sure that it will be a very important book. Furthermore, Katarzyna Homan, Monika Karamus, Grażyna Ślepowrońska, and Kinga Wołoszyn-Kowanda from the German Historical Institute offered organizational support, and I would also like to express my gratitude to Professor Jarosław Ćwiek Karpowicz, the director of the Polish Institute of International Affairs, Marcin Terlikowski, the head of research, for hosting this event. Anna Maria Dyner and the team of Public Information Office here were a great support as well. Thank you very much, and I will stop here because I'm quite sure that you're looking forward to the lecture and not to the opening remarks. I'm passing over to Anna Maria Dyner.
Thank you, Ms. Director, and without further delay, I will also ask Professor Budrytė to join me on the stage, and I hope that we will manage to. Yes, it's here. Perfect. Thank you once more. As my director introduced me, I'm Anna Dyner, head of International Security Program here in PISM, but also I'm dealing with Russia and Belarus and historical policy of both countries as well. But first of all, I would like to introduce Professor Dovilė Budrytė. So she is a professor of political science in Georgia Gwinnett College, but she was born in Vilnius, so quite near from here. And as someone who is visiting Lithuania twice a year, she knows very well how Russian propaganda is trying also to use Lithuanian history against this country. She also serves as an invited research and Vytaunas Kavolis Transdisciplinary Research Institute in Vytaunas Magnus University in Lithuania. And her research interests include memory politics, trauma, Holocaust, justice, and gender studies. And her publication include articles of various topics related to minority rights and memory politics on single-authored and 5 co-edited books. In 2014, she was the recipient of the University System of Georgia Excellence in Teaching Award. And in a period between 2020 and 24, she served as the president of Association for the Advancement of Baltic Studies, and she currently is also editor-in-chief of Vytaunas, a multidisciplinary peer-reviewed journal. So before giving the floor, I will just use the opportunity that I have a mic with just a brief introductory remarks, because as my director stressed, for the Russians, historical policy is one of the tools which they are used in foreign and security policy. They're blaming Poland for the launching of the Second World War, And at the same time, they try to avoid admitting that they were part of attacking Poland there. They also do not acknowledge that they occupied, for instance, Lithuania, but also the other Baltic states in between 1940 and 1990. They use the history to demonstrate their alleged right to decide about the fate of the territories of the past Russian Empire, including the city where we are. They use history to prove their rights to Ukraine and Belarus. They use history to drive a wedge between Poland and Ukraine and try to do the same between Poland and Belarus. Therefore, history should not be disregarded in the context of contemporary politics. This is why these issues are needed to be discussed. And this is why I have great pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Professor with her presentation. And according to the schedule, after this presentation, we will have a time to discuss. So please be prepared for your questions. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. I would also like to take an opportunity to thank the Polish Institute for International Relations and especially Dr. Jarosław Karpowicz. Thank you so much for your kind invitation. Thank you so much, Professor Magdalena Saryusz-Wolska from the German Historical Institute, Warsaw, for the invitation. And I'm definitely very grateful to Dr. Bartosz Dziewanowski-Stefańczyk for organizing this opportunity for me to share my insights. And as you can see, the topic of my presentation is entitled Securitizing Memory, Theorizing Defense, Identity, and the Past. And what I would like to do in this presentation, my big goal is to try to give a chance for you to familiarize yourself with the research that has been done in international relations on memory studies. I'm very excited indeed that in 2025 we have a growing and a very vibrant body of literature focusing on memory in international relations. I'd like just to share a little fact. When I was writing my dissertation on international relations in the 90s, I was not allowed to include memory. It was a very messy variable, and it was not taken seriously. I'm so happy that I was able to reinsert it into my work later on, this messy variable. And now we are seeing how essential it is to talk about memory in international relations when talking about even the so-called hardcore security issues. So I would like to open up with a quote from Maria Malkso, leading scholar in international relations, and I definitely think that it's appropriate that she is present in this room in spirit because she was the person who actually inserted memory studies into international relations and international studies. And the quote is from her recent book, Handbook on the Politics of Memory, published in 2023, and she wrote, "Memory matters for people and polities alike. Russia's kinetic war against Ukraine was preceded by and has run in parallel to an intense memory war, probing Ukraine's political subjectivity and sovereignty at various critical juncture points in the 20th century past," right? So two things from this particular quote. One thing is that it's very, very clear that even prior to the full-scale invasion, the Kremlin increasingly aggressively legislated, institutionalized, and propagated particular versions of Russian, Soviet, the so-called Great Patriotic War history, and used them quite successfully for their domestic legitimacy and foreign policy positioning. We know that in Putin's Russia, deviations from the official narrative, negative treatments of the Soviet past have become increasingly risky, and the state has claimed full monopoly over the so-called correct historical memory, right? So it's very, very clear that in the case of Russia, a war against Ukraine and memory war war are inseparable, and it's very, very clearly seen in this quote. And also, another thing that I would highlight in this quote is this importance of sovereignty, right? Sovereignty and memory, right? So on the one hand, we see Russia aggressively securitizing memory, but on the other hand, we see Ukraine, we see the Baltic states, we see other states in the region fighting a war against the securitization and trying to link memory to sovereignty, to perhaps uncertain sovereignty, right? So there are two important points to be made from this quote. So I'd like to focus during the time that I have on three questions. And question number one is, how do states construct the past as a threat or defensive resource, right? So this question actually entails in itself a definition of securitization of memory, which would be the processes whereby the states construct their past as a threat, right? So past becomes a threat, past becomes security issue, and also the states can use past as a defensive resource to mobilize populations, right, to defend themselves against the aggressor, right? So the first question would be, again, dealing with this broad definition of securitization of memory. The second question that I'd like to touch upon would be, what does the search for mnemonical security entail during times of critical situations such as war, right? I feel that very often in the literature on mnemonic securitization, the kind of implicit assumption is that we're working under conditions of peace, right? So mnemonic securitization is bad, mnemonic securitization privileges one particular story over the others, but very often we forget that critical situations such as the war, right, such as the current war against Ukraine waged by Russia, right, creates these critical situations when state identities are threatened, when new discourses arise, right? So I would like to suggest that indeed we need to pay attention to these critical situations and what happens to memory during those critical situations. And probably a big elephant in the room, right, would be how to preserve democratic memory politics, right? And memory studies, there's a lot written about agonistic memory politics, about importance to preserve memory pluralism. So the third question that I have would be, is it possible to fully avoid securitization of memory, privileging of one particular narrative under the conditions of war, right? So in relation to these three questions, I would like to make 3 points. And point number one, when surveying studies of the securitization of memory in the field of international relations, this growing body of literature, I would like to highlight the importance of biographical continuity for states, right? So in that particular case, looking from the perspective of the Baltic states, it's extremely important, despite attacks from Russia, despite attacks from some domestic actors, to kind of have this believable biographical continuous story, which very often consists of focus on anti-Soviet resistance, right, and trauma issues such as deportations. And the second focus point that I would like to zoom into would be my own work, the work with my colleagues. When we look at the processes of defending memory, that could be both sourced as mnemonical insecurity, right? Memory must be defended, to quote Maria Malkso, right? Especially during the critical situations. But it also could become a source of mnemonical security, right? Especially for state actors, especially for former victims, right, when they engage in these processes of fighting for memory. In that sense, they're also fighting for their own mnemonical security, right? And last but not least, I would like to address the point that it's probably impossible to avoid securitization of memory during critical situations, but that does not mean that we should give up on memory pluralism, right? So I hope to offer some hypotheses on whether and how it's possible to do that, and this is definitely something that needs to be discussed, right, during the situations such as war, because it's essential for preservation of democracy, it's essential for preservation of pluralism in societies such as Poland, societies such as the Baltic states. Let me start with my first point. As I mentioned, I'll offer a very brief survey of what we know in international relations about securitization of memory, what could be the main insights from this literature, with the hope that perhaps some of these insights will be useful for later discussions. So securitization of memory could be traced to the so-called Copenhagen School, and Copenhagen School emerged during the early 90s when there were these big debates about how to go beyond military security, right, the end of the Cold War, security is rethought, and the main theoretical insight of this Copenhagen School is that security is performed via speech acts that frame issues as existential threats, warranting extraordinary measures, right, and success depends on audience acceptance. So basically, securitization in this particular school is a move in language, right? An actor who's often a state leader or senior official claims that something is an existential threat to a valued referent object, so could be the state, society, environment, and the speech act seeks permission to use these extraordinary measures beyond normal politics. And here I'd like to mention that the Copenhagen School, in my eyes, was and continues to be essential for introducing the study of memory into international relations, because it conceptualizes situations when society can conceive threats in identity terms. And identity terms obviously are essential to the study of memory, right? So starting with the 90s, it became increasingly clear that when security of identity was threatened, right, memory comes into equation, and issues such as genocide, remembrance of genocide, become a matter of security, right? So without any doubt, this particular school allowed to move beyond the military sector to societal security of identity, which, as I mentioned before, is the clear bridge to memory, right? So quite a long route, but this was the start. The next school in my field of study, international relations, was a very important study of ontological security. So the scholars who are in this field, including Maria Malkso, are arguing that political actors, states, societies, they see continuity in self-identity, and once again, they defend biographical narratives even when material costs are high. So the defense of these biographical narratives that are attacked by external actors, also domestic actors, become essential for security, become essential for stability. So let me give you a very brief example of a very intense memory war that continues to go on in the Baltic states, continues to go on in Lithuania. So this narrative, this biographical narrative of the Lithuanian state, which was created in the late 80s and the early 90s, very much focuses again on the anti-Soviet partisans, right? One part of this biographical narrative. The other part of this biographical narrative would be deportations, and in the case of Lithuania, deportations, mass deportations, are referred to very often as genocide, a Soviet genocide, right? So this is this biographical narrative, and again, throughout the decades, it led to so many memory conflicts. It became part of Lithuania's foreign policy, and needless to say, there were many attacks from Russia, and this point of contention, one of the major points of contention, would be indeed the participation of some of the anti-Soviet partisans in the Holocaust. So you can imagine, right, the intensity of memory conflicts related to this biographical narrative. but again, there are quite a few memory warriors who remain committed to the defense of this biographical narrative, and it remains very important for stability and continuity of the state. And needless to say, in this particular case, for ontological continuity, memory is essential, even though, again, we can't avoid very intense memory conflicts. The third and the last school that I'd like to draw your attention to essential for the studies of securitization of memory was developed relatively recently, and very much the importance of this particular school is associated with Catherine Bachleitner, right? So she very much built on ontological security scholars such as Jennifer Mitzen, such as Brent Steele, Cătălina Kinval, Aisha Zarakal, and this particular school of thought focuses on the so-called significant historical other, right? So instead of kind of trying to relate memory to the other states, temporal security asks the questions building on philosophy, such as how was I in the past? What am I now? What can I become in the future, right? And states confronting temporal insecurities are fighting with the competing pasts related to themselves that imperil the coherence of national identity and also affect their foreign policy, right? So let me give you a specific example to illustrate this theoretical point from Bachleitner's work. She focuses very much on the cases of Germany and Austria, right? And in both of these cases, the significant historical other would be Nazi past, right? So Germany, on the one hand, is repentant about its Nazi past. In the eyes of Bachleitner, it accepted it, or it took a very long time for Austria to do the same, right? And for a very long time, Austria saw itself as a victim of the Nazi past and did not repent for it, right? So Bachleitner shows in both cases how these countries confronted their temporal insecurities, how it affected their foreign policy. It is still true today, right? Especially in the case of the Middle East. Germany has consistently supported Israel. This was through 67-73 war. Austria, for example, in 73 war, she supported the Palestinians because of this identity, this victimhood identity that Austria had. That's according to Bachleitner, right? So how the states look at themselves in relation to their significant historical other definitely affects the ways that states behave in foreign policy, right? So this temporal security secures the self in time through narratives and practices that sustain continuity with the past, right? So this significant historical other from the past becomes the most important thing in search of mnemonic security. Let me move to the work that I have done together with my colleagues, and we integrated the insights from these three schools, but primarily from ontological security and temporal security, when we looked at and continued to develop this concept of defending memory, right, which was developed by Maria Malkso, and she argued, and I completely agree with her, that this concept, this phenomenon of defending memory is very common in Eastern and Central Europe, when in many securitized contexts, like the current Russian war against Ukraine, historical remembrance becomes a real security issue, right? A very important issue, as important as the so-called physical security, right? And when defending memory, the state engages itself in this permanent process of creating and recreating a narrative about its origins, its coming into being within its own borders, and thus it differentiates itself from the chaos outside of national limits. So a certain level of security is introduced, right, when the state is able to differentiate itself from this chaos, right? States engage in permanent processes processes of creating and recreating narratives. But however, during that process, when states are trying to recreate narratives in search of security, new mnemonic security dilemmas arise, right? As I mentioned before, as Lithuania is trying to search for its own security by developing this narrative about fighting and suffering, inevitably this narrative is challenged, right? So new mnemonic security dilemmas arise, and as many memory scholars have argued, those new mnemonic security dilemmas are also related to real security dilemmas, right? So wars over memory, again, can be related to actual wars. So Maria Malkso, Nikolai Kopasov, and others, memory scholars, are very critical of these, especially in 2015. She was very critical of this defense of memory, securitization of memory, and called for desecuritizing remembrance to allow pluralism, right? So Nikolai Kopasov also was very critical of similar processes of and memory laws, privileging certain mnemonical narratives, and argued for what Maria Malkso calls the First Amendment, right? So to allow different mnemonic perspectives coexist, different narratives coexist, right, and do not privilege one particular narrative. We argue that it is extremely difficult to do during critical situations. What we're seeing during critical situations, such as Russia's war against Ukraine, there is an imperative to defend particular narratives in Eastern and Central Europe, right? But in our work, what we try to suggest that critical situations, such as the current war, is not necessarily has to be seen as something completely negative, right? Critical situations could also be seen as opportunities for identity changes, for new discourses, right? And it could empower actors. It could empower actors, marginalized actors who may in the past may have been unseen. And securitized memorialization practices could be impetus for social change, not just the end of pluralism, right? So specifically, to give a specific example from the case of Lithuania, what we're seeing in reaction to the Russo-Ukrainian war, we see mobilization of civil society. Memory is part of it, right? And mobilization of civil society does not need to be marked as the end of pluralism. In fact, it could be seen as supporting democratic consolidation. So in our book, Defending Memory in Global Politics, which was published in 2025, we continue with this argument, right, that we cannot avoid securitization of memory during the critical situations, critical junctures, such as the current war. And I would like to quote my colleague, Neringa Klumbitė, who wrote the concluding article for this book. And she argued that, look, Maria Malkso's memory must be defended was not written for the peaceful times. I'd like to quote Klumbitė here. She made a very, very passionate argument, much better than I can, that indeed during critical situations, it's quite normal to securitize memory, right? And she wrote, how could Ukrainians accept that they share spiritual, linguistic, and historical unity with Russians when these ideas clearly underlie Russia's military ideology against them? Or being, quote, little brothers of Russians, unquote, which entails subservience and subjugation cast through metaphors of intimacy. How could Crimean Tatars, Chechens, and Balts accept that the Soviet Union did not commit any crimes by deporting thousands of peaceful citizens? The conversation about the so-called radical interdependency could have been possible if Russia was democratic. However, Russia's democratic period was very, very short, right? And this radical interdependency, this desecuritization is absolutely impossible. So one conclusion that we draw from the study of these critical situations that we have to deal with the inevitability of mnemonic securitization during the times of war, right? Without any doubt, Russia is aggressively using memory politics, but in reaction, we must admit that, unfortunately or fortunately, right, mnemonic securitization is going to occur. But I would not like to suggest that it leads into a death of democracy or death of democratic memory politics, because it's possible to have what I believe could be called just securitization, just mnemonic securitization, and this very much building on Rita Floyd's concept of just securitization. So according to Floyd, for securitization to be regarded as just, securitizing actors must be sincere in their intention to protect the referent object they themselves identified and declared. So in political communities, defending memory always comes together with a defense of sovereignty, which is defended sincerely and passionately. So therefore, what I'd like to suggest is that, again, when it comes to mnemonic securitization during the times of war, what we are seeing very much in East and Central Europe, we are seeing instances of just mnemonic securitization, when mnemonic securitization comes together with the so-called mnemonic decolonization, which would be a resistance, passionate resistance to colonial narratives imposed by Russia. So I have just a little bit of time left for 4 conclusions. This is going back to the 4 questions that I raised and 4 focus points. And one major conclusion based on ontological security literature and defending memory in international relations is that it's not uncommon for the states to defend their biographical narratives, and it's basically done by all states. Critical situations such as the war, Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine is essential for understanding of mnemonical security. And what we are seeing during those critical situations, we see inevitability of actions to defend memory during the times of war, right? So inevitability to defend particular narratives during those critical situations. This leads me to introduce, and perhaps somewhat provocatively, the concept of just mnemonic securitization, and argue that it is possible to continue commitment to democratic memory politics as long as mnemonic securitization, again, is relevant to mnemonic decolonization, resistance to imperial narratives, and at the same time maintaining commitment to truth, maintaining commitment to talking openly about your own historical crimes, right, and also historical justice. So I'll stop right here.
Thank you, Professor, for... As I stressed today, technique is definitely against me. Thank you, Professor, for your keynote lecture. I have some questions and some summing up, but we also gathered here for you, for the audience. So if you have any questions, please let us know, and we will try to give you the opportunity to ask them. And this is the momentum this is the moment. Okay, Mr. Director.
Thank you very much for this dense and inspiring lecture. I have a question about the anthropomorphization of the state, because in these concepts we speak about, or we use phrases like the state does something, the state makes something, and so on. But in fact, the state is a very complex institution or organization, and there may be memory wars within the state. So we have this situation in Poland, for example, that we have different institutions responsible for international affairs within the government and within the presidential office, and they are conflicted. So what if the state does not have one voice?
It's indeed it's a fantastic question. It's a great question, and you know this debate about anthropomorphization of states has been going on in ontological security literature for a very long time. And I just recall being on a panel with Jelena Subotic, and she also got the same question, and she said, you keep telling me that I cannot tell that the state has emotions or states have a story. Yes, they can, right? So it's indeed, it's a very good, it's a very relevant criticism of states speaking with one voice, of this having this biographical narrative. But nevertheless, I would like to suggest that the literature on collective memory, on collective emotions, does suggest that it's possible to discern this biographical narrative from the states, and it can be done from the main museums. It can be done from the textbooks. Yes, of course, state, without any doubt, is a very, very complex mechanism, right? But nevertheless, it's possible to talk about state narrative and do it empirically, studied empirically, right? Mm-hmm.
If I may add something, especially non-democratic states has this own view of history, which we can observe every single day in regards to Russia, but also to Belarus, using history against us. But who has next question? Okay, here.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Dovilė, for this inspiring talk and for giving us a theoretical framework in which we can position our contribution. I would like to ask the question, which role professional historians have in the securitization of memory, since, as I understand, the task of professional historians, it's not our role to support state-sponsored narrative, but critically ask. And that's a kind of tension which is created by the different roles state officials have in the creation of memory and professional historians. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think this question goes into the heart of differences between, as we were talking before, authoritarian states and democratic states, right? And memory politics in democratic states and authoritarian states. What we're seeing very much in authoritarian states, such as Russia, would be the commitment of historians to the state narrative and not questioning it, not engaging in memory pluralism. So I completely agree with your argument that historians need to maintain their independence, need to maintain the academic freedom, and need to question the continued securitization of the state narrative, continue to question, if needed, that one narrative that the state has. So professional historians, again, their independence is essential, and that's why I think it's problematic when historians are engaged directly in securitization of memory through memory institutes, right? I think it's essential for historians to maintain their professional independence, and that's where we can expect a continued memory pluralism even during critical situations. Having said this, I would like to also suggest that, for example, I'm familiar with the case of Lithuania and what the critical situation did, this critical situation of the Russo-Ukrainian war. It very much gave very emotional power to the argument about anti-Soviet resistance. And it becomes extremely difficult starting in 2014, but also after the full-scale invasion of 2022, even for professional historians to challenge this heroic narrative of fighting and suffering. But nevertheless, again, there are brave voices who continue to do that. There are brave voices who continue to pluralize the Soviet story, right? And that, again, would be what professional historians should be ready to do, even though it takes braveness. But this pluralism can be maintained, right? My argument was that it's impossible to avoid probably securitization, but at the same time, in democratic, pluralistic societies, professional historians should become the source of pluralism, should continue to challenge one narrative if needed.
Thank you very much. We have time for 2 or 3 additional questions. So Bartosz, maybe you, and then someone maybe in the back.
Thank you so much for your lecture. But speaking again about this relation between historians and the state, isn't it contradictory, independent research and the, well, after all, positive image of the state that the ministries of foreign affairs are trying to create, and then speaking about own crimes, for example, does not really fit into that narrative, does it?
That's a very good question, but I think it could fit into the narrative because, I mean, I think starting, I would say, with 2000 or so, we see this international morality in which states apologize, in which states acknowledge their own crimes, right? Elazar Barkan, for example, wrote about it as early as 2000, right? This justice, which is very much victim-based justice, and the states actually democratic states apologize, they acknowledge their crimes, and this is even helping them to be good citizens. Let me give you a specific example. Lithuania, in this particular case, apologized for the Holocaust in 1997, but even later on, Lithuania established Goodwill Foundation, trying to engage at least in some level of justice in relation to the Holocaust crimes. And this helps Lithuania, and the foreign ministry supports it fully, right? This helps to play into this Western idea of victim-centered justice. My worry is, however, that it looks like these international norms are increasingly erased, and there's increasingly less and less commitment to victim-based justice, right? But to answer your question, I do not think that this needs to contradict each other. As long as we as international community have a commitment to victim-based justice, to the guilt of the nations, acknowledgement the guilt of the nations, I think it can be done, right? It's just very, very tempting. I know it's tempting in the case of Poland. It's tempting for many actors in Lithuania to try to suggest that we were only victims and no crimes were committed.
Thank you very much. So, no, I'm expecting someone from the back, especially to ask the questions. Oh, here we have one volunteer, and then Mr. Ambassador, I give the floor to you.
Thank you so much for your lecture. It's very insightful, but I would like to refer to other heated topic of debate within ontological security studies. There was a question regarding agent structure debate, and I would like to refer about the topic, where is the source of ontological or mnemonic security, right? Is it within the state that states follow on mnemonic narratives, autobiographical narratives for their own sake, for their societies, or maybe it's external, they following those narratives for other states? What is your opinion on it?
Right. It's definitely one of the major, debates in ontological security studies, right? I mean, so for example, Brent Steele very much focuses on this internal biographical narrative, but obviously others focus. Bachliner too very much argues that the main focus of a historical memory should be external, and it's important for the states to have their or mnemonical security in relation to other states, right? I would try to avoid this either-or debate. It's either one or the other, right? When it's framed in this way, I always get a bit nervous and uncomfortable. I would say it's both. I would say it's very, very important for the states to maintain this internal continuity, biographical narrative, right? And without any doubt, in democratic states, it's being constantly challenged, and this is to be expected. I mean, this is not to say that all voices should be suppressed and this search for continued biographical narrative is without problems, right? So it's very important for the states to have that biographical continuity, but biographical continuity helps to routinize, helps to establish routines with other states and defend, perhaps if necessary, that biographical narrative vis-a-vis the states. So I would say, you know, I know theoretically it's difficult to say that it could be both, but I think it is.
Thank you very much. So last question goes for Mr. Ambassador. Here is the mic. So.
Thank you, Professor, for your inspiring lecture. What would be your advice, you know, to states, diplomacies, so that we don't lose this battle for hearts? You know, the battle between democratic states and the authoritarian and dictatorial states.
It's a very interesting and a very difficult question, right? But I think several things that come to mind, and I think even though it might be extremely difficult to do sometimes for politicians, for political reasons, but I think it's essential to be committed to historical truth and critical thinking. I mean, to give a specific example, what I mean by that, I mean, in the case of Lithuania, as I mentioned, one of the challenges to this heroic anti-Soviet resistance comes from participation of some of the anti-Soviet fighters in the Holocaust. So for Lithuania, to give a specific example, not to lose this battle in memory war with Russia, with the other states, it's essential to look very openly into the past. It's essential to acknowledge the crimes. It's essential to say, look, the fact that we acknowledge the engagement of some of the anti-Soviet partisans into the Holocaust does not mean that this was true about everybody, but that's where professional historians are so essential. That's why it's so essential to maintain, even during the times of war, critical view into the past, critical research, which is happening. And the second thing that I would also mention, not to lose the war, I think it's essential to continue. I mean, and this international morality has been very much criticized. This victim-focused international morality has been very criticized as being very Western-centric, etc., etc. But I think it is essential to maintain commitment to historical justice, commitment to restitution processes, even though they might be extremely difficult. This very much has the relationship to, obviously, World War II once again. But as we can tell, the major battles still wage about World War II, right? This Russo-Ukrainian war and World War II are basically inseparable. So I think for the states in our region, it's essential to admit that we're not just victims, that there were perpetration too as well done, and it's essential to continue the commitment to victim-based justice as we are also articulating historical truth.
Thank you very much. So we almost get into time. I will try to sum up and probably also give some thoughts for Bartosz for the second panel, but definitely memory should be defended even in peacetime. Why? Because if not, it will become even more dangerous for us in a wartime, and we can see this in regards to Polish-Ukrainian relations. If we solve our historical problems before the full-scale war, probably nowadays we don't have a situation in which we will give a possibility for Russia to split us. It's one issue. Definitely, we also have to think about our memory, our history, because truth is probably the first one which dies during the war. So here comes also the question how to fight with all of those issues, even, I will say, during the hybrid warfare times, not only the kinetic war. Something which was very important from my perspective is also the question of decolonization. A friend of mine who is sitting here is focusing on this topic, but definitely we could see that Russia, but also China, which we didn't mention today, is using these narratives against, for instance, Western European countries / the US as well. So, just to sum up, history and memory matters on peacetime, crisis time, but wartime as well. And I will stop here. Thank you for your attention. I would like to thank Ms. Professor, but also we just have like 15 minutes of technical break, and then I would like to introduce Bartosz and the second panel, which probably will be fascinating as well. I'm looking forward to this discussion. So here we have coffee break, and we will come back to you during 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, hello. Let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you in the premises of the Polish Institute of International Affairs to the debate devoted to combating the Russian disinformation and memory politics, which is co-organized by the German Historical Institute in Warsaw. We have already heard the lecture by Dovilė Budrytė, which was, from my point of view, very important because it shows the new some of those theories are not so new, but in general, a new methodology and theory approaches to memory and security, and I think it was worth presenting them here in Warsaw, Poland. Now, this topic is, I believe, important for at least 3 reasons. One is that the war in Ukraine is going on less than 300 kilometers from the very spot where we are sitting, which is not so obvious for probably most of people on the street. And during this war, history is massively engaged, being just another weapon. So it's definitely worth showing it. Then also, Russia has a tremendous experience when it comes to disinformation, and it draws from as early as the 1920s in its policy. So here we have an enemy which is extremely experienced, skillful, with a huge network of contacts worldwide, and therefore I'm afraid that we are still lagging behind, but maybe Ambassador Chłoń will have another opinion on that. And then the third reason is that the West, in general, is having also various problems, which just make us even more prone to this kind of disinformation, including also the technological changes, the fact that media are losing their filters, and now everyone can post something. So we need to be more and more aware. Now, my name is Bartosz Dziewanowski-Stefańczyk. I'm a research fellow at the German Historical Institute in Warsaw. I specialize in public diplomacy, Polish-German affairs, and foreign memory politics. And I have the pleasure to invite right now Ambassador Tomasz Chłoń to the debate. We had to change the plans because Ambassador needs to leave in half an hour, so we will start with him, and then I will introduce the other panelists. So Tomasz Chłoń is a Polish diplomat and researcher on international security, disinformation and hybrid threats, head of mission in Finland, MFA envoy for countering disinformation and chair of MFA Resilience Council. He is former ambassador to Estonia and Slovakia, former NATO Moscow office director and lecturer, and co-author of many works on disinformation. He also participated in a joint book on Russian disinformation in memory politics, which was published, I believe, shortly after the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022. And it's one of, well, I would say, most important works on that. So before we get to the narratives, actors, and counteracting that I would like to talk about today, let me ask Ambassador Chłoń, on your perspective as a practitioner, is the disinformation within memory politics something special, or is it just one of many types of disinformation that you have to tackle?
Thank you for the invitation. And apologies, I'm chairing today this body that you mentioned, the Council, Resilience Council. I think that it's one of the key elements. We have to deal with all kinds of disinformation topics, narratives, but the history of the memory link is absolutely crucial in the sense that for Russia it is the number one, probably the number one area where they are active and forceful and effective. Kamil, Basaj will have probably very interesting stories to tell you, because this memory. The memory narrative is a fundamental element of what scholars, researchers named identity, or even meta-narratives, or identity narratives. So who we are, what we identify with, and this, especially the Second World War. Here is this element in Russian propaganda that they use very skillfully, especially in the global South, where the knowledge of history, European history, is not very strong, and one could say that they are not very much interested in the history of Europe. So when a Russian ambassador publishes an article or gives an interview, his words, his lies fall on a fertile ground, and we are not proactive enough as the West, individual member states and institutions, European institutions. I think we can do much better.
Yeah, exactly. That brings me to the second question. That is, in the conclusions of the Polish presidency, well, they were not. These are not the conclusions of the General Affairs Council, due to the fact that two countries opposed, Slovakia and Hungary. So does this weaken us in the sense that we are not united? And therefore, the question is whether we should stand against it as European institutions, or are certain separate states more important in that combat? Because after all, Russia is using various narratives against various states, so it might be difficult to have just one stance.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Russians invest lots of resources to doing what they are doing, and it's research-based. They know how to localize their communications, money-wise, it's billions of dollars a year. and many research or quasi-research institutes in Russia, both civilian and military, are engaged in projecting the operations. But we should do both as EU and its institutions and individual member states. One of the problems is that the standards of response to Russian disinformation is in some countries very low. In some countries, in fact, Russians have access to state media and propagate their policies through official media. But I think what we have to do is, as Europe and as member states, and we have, as Poland during the presidency in the Council, suggested such a thing, but we haven't been able to push it through yet perhaps, is that we divide the work vis-à-vis the global South. So what I have in mind is that Poland has assets, let's say, in Senegal, a very good embassy, people passionate to counter Russian disinformation there. We have relations and good embassy, big stuff in South Africa. Finland has a special relationship with Namibia. Czech Republic has a special relationship with Zambia. So why don't we divide our work and invite to Europe influencers, public opinion formers from the countries, let them see, how we function. Let them then tell the story about, Europe, European Union back when, without, imposing what they should tell to their audiences. So, in a way, when we combine the force of 27 member states with the skills of EU institutions, I think we could do better. Maybe. It will take some time because Brussels is a place where the decision making is slow, but we have to push, and this push also from the civil society, of the member states is important.
But that sounds as if it was still being planned. Whereas in 2022, in this chapter that you wrote, you wrote that you are cautiously optimistic. I totally agree that this kind of actions should be taken, but what is being done right now?
Well, you see, it's. I wouldn't go into debate whether the glass is half full or half empty, and I'm not maybe. I'm not objective, in a sense that when I see criticism of what we are doing here in Poland, for example, the government doesn't respond, in any way to. We are not active or proactive, not responding to this disinformation battle, which is simply not true. Because if you look at what happened in the past couple of years. Starting with even such things like campaigns in the media, radio, television, internet. You ride to work in your car and you switch on, the station that you like, and you hear a simple message, from one of the institutions, governmental institutions. Don't get fooled by a troll. So we are raising the awareness of the problem all the time. We are creating this network of networks in the sense that we have the council that I have mentioned. There are 25 representatives in the council of 25 organizations, but all of them were supported by another 5. So you see this is quite a formidable platform already. And we also created bodies to interagency, so interministerial bodies, also with intelligence services inside of them. So, and they meet on a weekly basis. And so on and so on, educational projects with the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Culture, how we can benefit from culture, from the heritage, to tackle disinformation. Lots of things are happening, but in democracies, this is the key problem. We can't use the same methods as authoritarians, so they are using our weaknesses. And if I were to define what is the most important problem now that we have in Poland and in other countries, it's not that the Russian media or Sputnik or fake platforms appear and we know who is behind. The problem is that we have very influential politicians, active or activists, very active and with huge number of followers that are spreading Russian narratives. So in the project that I coordinate under EU Horizon, we are trying to figure out how to create a simple application, mobile application, that would be somehow interfaced with the Facebook and X, and when a user reads, a content, and suddenly there is a narrative that is similar to Russian, or then that there is an alert, through this application. Look, you are now reading something that is similar to the Russian narratives. So a very simple but massive, yeah. I'm always stressing this massiveness of response, that we have to have this bottom-up approach prevailing, also on regional and local levels. How in your commune, when you have a problem, for example, when we had the floods in the south, and immediately the Russians are establishing and operationalizing a network of Telegram accounts, thousands, to point that the authorities cannot cope with the consequences of the floods, that people are not assisted, right? So that you need a very strong local response and the capabilities to respond.
Okay, my last question, and then we can open the floor to the public for like 10 minutes, probably, I hope so. The last question is, in the conclusions of the Polish presidency that I've already mentioned, we can read that the presidency invites the Commission to take leadership together with member states in promoting European remembrance across Europe. So, in your opinion, again, as a practitioner dealing with Russian disinformation, what kind of remembrance should that be that we should promote?
What that we heard from Professor today, that kind of remembrance, that is honest, that we also admit, what we did. Yesterday in Finland, a report was published by a commission about the wrongdoings that Sami people suffered in Finland, and then Prime Minister Orpo said that Finland should apologize. Those are based on truth. But of course, the conclusions also, I think, invited member states to establish a pan-European resilience council. That was one of our goals, and that happened in the European Democracy Shield that was published on the 12th of October. This idea of a resilience center has been included, and now details are being developed.
All right, thank you. So we have now around 15 minutes for questions and answers. So do we have any questions from the public? Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a short one. So I just wondered if the problem here is maybe that we have no vision in Europe, Would you be so kind and introduce yourself first of all? Of course, no problem. Christian Niżewski from the Adenauer Foundation here in Warsaw. So, again, thank you very much. And just a short question here. So, is the problem that maybe we have no vision? if we could formalize a vision for us European against Russian imperialism, a vision for our future as a European Union, as a continent, we could use history to support this vision, could mobilize people to believe in this vision. So is the problem here maybe that we only trying to remember history but not using history for future visions? Thank you.
I don't know. I don't think that we'd have no vision. You know, the whole European integration process is a vision. You know, so in this meta sphere, what happened after the full-scale invasion? You know, in fact, what you witnessed was a very consolidated and full of solidarity response to that war in Europe, based on the vision, you know, that the system that Europe created, this multilateral cooperation, you know, multi-center, not polarized, is exactly the system that would work not only for Europe well, but for the whole world. You know, what we did probably wrong was that we thought we are absolutely right in everything, and we were not responsive enough, especially to the propositions from the global South, to give them more voice and participation in international relations and in international institutions. You know, starting from the Security Council, EU and Security Council, where the current 5 permanent member states simply don't want to move from this current. So I think that there is a vision, you know, of where we should go. The answer probably, as President Stubb suggests, is where this global South will move. You know, whether the global South would move towards the global West more, or the global East. Yeah.
If I might suggest something, if the other panelist also has some questions for Mr. Chłoń, probably it would be good to use those mics which are on the tables. But here we have another question.
Yes, my name is Antjen Zayarniuk. I'm a doctoral student at the Institute of History. And I was wondering, what is your view on increased role of state in regulating social medias? Because on one hand, it's obviously like a pretty dangerous line because of oppressing free speech and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, we can see that Russia is very effective in utilizing social media to spread their agenda by using through the prism of ideology of traditional values and so on, and like the decadent West, the decadent liberal West, and it seems to me that they're pretty effective with like this barrage of disinformation, like very often masked by other things.
Well, this is one of the most difficult problems now that we face. We thought before the second Trump administration that we could be more effective in regulating the media, social media. I mean, the internet, especially, not to introduce censorship. And this is, I think, the basic challenge, you know, for those who are proponents of regulation, that they do not fall into the trap that they want to censor, because this is absolutely not true. And I've said it many times that if you think that you can do anything hiding behind, numbers, so you hiding behind anonymity in the internet, and you can say anything. This is not true. I mean, if so, in my view, it would be the world would be better if we have abolished, bots, fake bots, and things like that, and people would have to identify themselves, on social media when they express their opinions. But this is difficult, and I don't know to where we would go. I mean, where this process will lead us, because the Americans are even blackmailing Europeans, in the sense that they say, oh, if you start to regulate more, or you should even deregulate. If you don't deregulate, then otherwise we will use tariffs, in our trade relations. So this is a difficult thing, but we should not give in. And just like we regulated, traffic for hundreds of years, starting somewhere in Connecticut, that they limited speed, in 1900. And then the next states followed only 16 years after. And you remember what Korwin-Mikke here was saying in 1997, that he will not use safety belts. But well, we did regulate this, so it will take time. As you said, I'm a cautious optimist, so I think we will have more order in the social. That's simply a requirement, but it's not just an isolated process. You have to do other things. There are ideas how to make young people, especially, use the mobile phones. Even ban social media in Denmark. I think they already decided to ban. In Australia, of course. It's also linked to other issues like trust in the public media, so that people use more public media. Here in Poland, we have too much political control over public media, and there is a draft law now in the government to change it. So, in other words, to give public media to the civil society.
We have 5 more minutes because you have to leave like 15:15. So, yeah, okay. So that would be the last question. Excuse me.
My name is Aditya Suresh. I'm an independent analyst. You had briefly mentioned about the fragmentation of responses across different EU member states. I would like to ask you, what practical steps can be taken to strengthen a unified European narrative without undermining pluralism in historical memory?
Forgive me for using now some notes, but it's important because the strategic communication directors of the European member states meet regularly, either online or physically, and they try to, to more what the Union is doing and member states more effective. And here is what the last meeting took place on the 20th of November, so it was a pretty recent one. And the key points that would answer your question are that shift from reactive to proactive communication with plans, narratives, and communicate around 3 core priorities: defending Europe, securing the neighborhood. So this is about securing the neighborhood. I would go globally, and also with the narratives about history, that could be left maybe to those member states who don't have this post-colonial heritage or burden. A clear, memorable, human-centered narratives instead of complex institutional language, and then define and pick the audiences properly as well. I mentioned about public opinion formers and influencers, how we can engage them, and adopt a model that is structured, not just one-off, campaign, but campaign that is starts from flagship level and regional and local and thematic.
All right. That was the last question. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for your great input. Okay, now let me introduce the other speakers. Just let me find my notes. Okay, so from my right, Mykola Riabchuk is a principal research fellow at the Institute of Political and Ethnic Studies in Kiev and a visiting researcher at the German Historical Institute in Warsaw. He penned a dozen books translated into Polish, French, German, Serbian, and Hungarian, and was distinguished with several awards. Most notably the Antonowicz Prize, the Benemerito Medal of the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Jerzy Giedroyć Prize, the Order of Merit of the Republic of Poland, and the Taras Shevchenko National Prize in Arts and Literature. 2014 to 18, he headed the Ukrainian Pen Center, and 2014 to 23, chaired the jury of the Angelus International Literary Award. His latest books in English are Eastern Europe since 1989 Between the Loosened Authoritarianism and Unconsolidated Democracy, and then the second one, A Defense of the Metternich's Garden, Essays on Europe, Ukraine and Europeanization. Now I lost my first page. Okay. Dr. Sandra Dahlke is the director. Here we have Dr. Sandra Dahlke. She is the director of the Max Weber Network Eastern Europe. She studied history and Slavic studies in Paris, Cologne, and Hamburg, and obtained a doctoral degree from the University of Hamburg. 1998 to 2011, she was a lecturer and a researcher at the Helmut Schmidt University, then held a number of scholarships in France. And then between 2012 and 24, she worked at the German Historical Institute in Moscow, being its director between 2018 and 24. Actually, the last director, as in May 24, the institute was classified as an undesirable organization by the Russian Ministry of Justice and closed. Her current research interests include the history of the Soviet Union and the history of the Tsarist Empire in the second half of the 19th century. The next speaker is Kamil Basaj. He leads the work of teams responsible for responding to incidents in the information environment at the InfoOps Poland Foundation. He is creator of processes for securing the information environment, professionally affiliated with the Cyber Defense Component Command. His professional experience also includes work at the National Security Department of the Chancellery of the Prime Minister, the Government Security Center, and the Ministry of National Defense. Lecturer and author of various works. Then the last but not the least panelist today is Dr. Cătălina Nastasiu, who is assistant lecturer at the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration, Bucharest, where she is currently teaching courses on media and digital literacy. Her areas of academic interest include the study of disinformation, the analysis of media frames and strategic narratives. She has professional experience in journalism, fact-checking, and has been part of a series of initiatives to combat disinformation and promote media and digital literacy. In 2023, she published a volume that addressed the information war and disinformation narratives promoted in Russian media in the context of the invasion of Ukraine. Having said that, I would like to ask the first question. I will ask Mykola Riabchuk. In one of your papers, you wrote about the Ukraine's absence on mental maps of vast majority of Europeans, and that's why I mentioned how close the war is, because I don't really think that most people here acknowledge it's so close, which is a byproduct of the Russian imperial knowledge and its cultural diplomacy, since many Ukrainians, artists, academics, and so on, but also facts from its history are appropriated by Russia. So, what are the main narratives of the Russian disinformation regarding the Ukrainian history and the Russian-Ukrainian relations, and can we observe changes in this narrative since before the Orange Revolution, so in the period when Ukraine started fighting for its real independence?
Thank you. No, first of all, as my remark, I believe that you mentioned this appropriation of Ukrainian cultural legacy by Russia. I feel it's rather marginal problem. It's a problem, of course, but it's not the biggest problem, because the main problem is, of course, silencing of Ukraine, muting of Ukraine, making it invisible. This is what the colonial dominance is about. Any empire tries to introduce its own narrative. And at the same time to silence the alternative narratives. This is what the entire story was about. And of course, Ukraine used to be a primary victim of this policy, because for centuries it was invisible, it was virtually non-existent. I remember all these articles in 1990s in Western press, like unwanted stepchild of perestroika, or something like this, nowhere nation, and so on, unexpected nation, etc., etc. So of course, all this results from some sort of structural inequality and epistemic injustice. So of course we struggle now to re-establish this epistemic justice. And I feel, as an old man, I try to find some, silver lining in any dark cloud. And there are a lot of dark clouds everywhere, but at the same time, what I see positive in this developments, in this Russian preoccupation with history, is that, this is real preoccupation, and it never existed to such a degree before, because I cannot imagine either Stalin or Khrushchev or Brezhnev or whoever who would publish 5,000 words essay about unity, historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. I cannot imagine them talking to any journalist like Putin talked to Tucker Carlson half an hour about ancient history of Russia or Russia, or again in Alaska, he tried also to deliver a lecture to Trump about this, very very complicated historical issues, which means that he lost control. He's really preoccupied. He's really obsessed with these issues. Why? Just because he feels that Russia is very vulnerable at this point. Finally, it became very vulnerable, because before that, nobody questioned. Everybody knew that Russia is a 1,000-year-old country. Russia has, this interrupted continuity from Kiev. It's a direct successor of Rus, and etc., etc. Crimea has been always Russian. All these mantras were normalized and never questioned. Since 1990s, they began to be questioned, and the very existence of Ukraine, of course, is a major irritant, because the very existence of Ukraine poses this question, makes us to doubt about all these things which look like absolute truth, unquestionable. Yeah. So I believe that they have very good reason to feel ontologically insecure. Absolutely. Because the very existence of Ukraine is a real existential threat, not to Russians. Of course, Russians are alive and well, and probably would remain alive and well, but to Russian Empire, because it undermines all the legitimacy of this empire, the identity, imperial identity, which was constructed upon various myths. And Ukraine is in the very center of this mythology. It's centerpiece of Russian historical mythology and Russian imperial identity. If you pull out this element, it collapses. So of course I understand them, I understand all these convulsions, because they have to rescue the empire. Without Ukraine, Brzezinski was right when he wrote this. Very few people understood, because they interpreted Brzezinski's statement as allegedly he meant probably demographic problems, economical issues, geopolitical. No, he understood very well that it's a matter of identity, of imperial identity, which is based on alleged continuity from Kiev and so on. That's the point. And so we have to understand this war as a war of identity. And of course, history is a very important element of this myth-making. And this is actually why Putin in particular, but all the apparatus are so preoccupied with the issues, because it's existential. It's really existential for them.
Okay. Now, moving to Sandra, Dahlke, because in this first part we would like to touch on the narratives. So, taking into account that Russia had very special relations with Germany up to a certain moment recently, how would you assess, and looking at the narratives also from being in Moscow, how would you assess the changes of the historical narrative towards Germany? And do you think that the Germans are more susceptible to this kind of disinformation? It should be on. No, all right.
Perhaps I can start with the foundation of the German Historical Institute in Moscow, because it very much connects to your question. The institute had been founded in 2005 in order to support Russian-German cooperation in terms of reconciliation policies, and that had been done because Russia was considered the legal successor of the Soviet Union, and I suppose that perhaps there were also economic interests probably behind that, but I don't have to tell you that every government, since it's not only the Social Democrats, but also the Christian Democrats, had a very particular relationship to Russia. And I think this perhaps on the one hand side, a lack of knowledge, and on the other hand side, this particular German inclination, and also the taking into consideration the role that Mikhail Gorbachev had played for the unification of Germany, for the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Europe, and so on. Germany was very, very inclined to have good relationships with Russia at the one hand side, and the other hand side, I think there was a lack of knowledge of this imperial setting and about the needs and the histories of those countries which were, for one part of the history, part of the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire. In Germany, I think public opinion with regard to Russia is very much divided between the East and the West of Germany, and that is quite strange phenomenon, because you see that a party, the Alternative for Germany, a right-wing party, which had been created by West German professors, but now it's very popular in East Germany, in West Germany as well. But I think the number of the vote differs quite obviously, and that is strange, because Eastern Germans, they had their experience with Soviet rule, but for them it's a kind of history of, since the reunification, a kind of history of constant humiliation, an idea of being taken over by West Germany, and I think that makes them so open for Russian propaganda. And it's strange to see that that there's a tendency to consider Putin kind of a revenge for the humiliated Eastern Europe, Eastern German soul. And another group would perhaps be the Germans, those people with German origins who left the Soviet Union and who resettled to Germany. They're mostly Russian-speaking. They're very susceptible to Russian propaganda, and they have their own experience of not being integrated very well, and I think that makes them so susceptible to Russian propaganda. And personal for me, it's very, very difficult to persuade German politicians about the need to counter this propaganda, because many, I don't know, in Germany, in the public, in general public, and also politicians, they are not so aware that history is used as a weapon in war. And for them, history is some minor matters, perhaps a little interesting, but they don't understand. It's very difficult to make them understand why history matters and why we should make more efforts in counteracting this falsifications of history.
So this problem remains, even though we are observing the weaponization for a number of years. Okay. Mr. Basaj, then you also did research into the global south. So how would you assess the Russian disinformation in history towards the global south? Because it's quite successful, I guess.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. Well, the answer is quite complicated, but I think it also answers a few questions before in general. So, of course, yes, I do represent a more tactical layer of such efforts. So we spend a lot of time in direct contact with activities, confront adversaries, propaganda on ground. And I think that something is not new, but very effectively used by Russia in the global south is so-called multi-domain, old school, the way they influence the information environment in general. So they use, of course, cyberspace as one of the most important right now from the perspective of information habits of different types of groups of society. But they also very actively using diplomacy on the ground, business, affiliated and non-affiliated, so two pillars, right, official and the gray zone activities. They offer a lot of content for free, a very popular one, especially in smaller media outlets, so it's quite easy to receive, good advertisement, good movies. One of the newest one is about Made by Russia Today, a company directly targeting the perception of the history of relations about Poland and Russia in general. It's about 1,000-year conflict. Of course, mainly based on false pillar of history in general, but when you are watching this movie, it's quite well prepared. There is a logical sequence, step by step, event by event. So the auditory receive logically completed, based on false pillars, picture of the history of the relations between Poland and Russia in general. Of course, it's used not to inspire discussion about the history. It's being used by Russia right now to discredit Poland in a very similar way how they were discrediting the Ukraine years before. The model is very, very similar. This is something we observe for many years, that Russia signs propaganda and disinformation about Chechnya war through Ukraine on ongoing full-scale invasion is using very similar TTPs. TTPs mean techniques, tactics, procedures to influence the public opinion in general. And one of the most difficult to confront is the sphere of cyberspace in general. Because Russians are using it offensively by adopting PSYOPs TTPs to civil sphere of so-called media being controlled by Kremlin. But what does it mean from technical perspective? It means that they are using, for example, more than 200 web pages to split propaganda message on the daily basis, maybe 2-3 articles per minute sometimes, because today this process is automated. 7 or 8 years ago it was mainly made by a human, right? When Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V, Enter, spread. And now it's distributed using artificial intelligence, a special software, right, that these websites are based on in general. So it's also translated to many different types of languages at the same time. And we have a discussion about what we can do with it. The main goal of Russia and using such a VIET means a virtual information environment distribution model, is not to spread this message for this time. It's about to achieve a goal to saturate the cyberspace with propaganda and messages for next decade. So I think answering one of the question about how we can use our effort to make counter propaganda. We should do the same because it's legal in general, but of course it's quite challenging because from academical perspective, I don't know how many of you do import your books, your writings, your lectures to, for example, artificial intelligence LLMs. APIs that they are allowed to learn themselves on the basis of these resources. Because from latest reports we see that, for example, propaganda messages or misinformation is affecting LLMs right now. Why? Because they are just receiving a lot of manipulated messages. So we should answer for it. So we decided to implement as much historical-based materials, publications, books written in Polish, in English, about Polish history to ChatGPT, for example, in this model that we can learn him. But I think this is the model we should discuss on the West in general about the digitalization of the knowledge. Because the next generation will mainly ask by a cell phone or some different application. We just put the question and try to receive the answer, and that's going to be it. They're not going to be interested in analysis, comparison of the versions of history. No, just what application would answer is going to be the fact. So I think now we should work on how these applications are working on our benefit, to avoid the situation that there's going to be information supremacy in the next decade by Chinese, Russia, propaganda efforts, because answering the beginning of the question about Russian operations, they are supported by Chinese on site very often. I mean, the Chinese resources in cyberspace are very often responsible for exposing current Russian operations, but only in the line when China is the beneficiary of it, right? So, just for the beginning, thank you.
So one of the practical results should be, for example, sponsoring by the states open access, right, of various books, so that you could teach the AI with them, right?
This is one of the ideas, of course. Another is just to invest in communication activities. Right now, using current technology is, building a web portals, spreading message in Arabic is not a challenge. It's rather about the idea, not the resources in general. So, of course, answering Ambassador Chłoń question about what we are doing as a Poland. So, Ministry of Foreign Affairs have public diplomacy project. So, our counter measure activity on the ground is mainly financed by Polish MFA. So what was our answer for this Russian propaganda movie, 1,000 Years Conflict? It was a series of podcasts in Arabic. Very short one, 5 minutes, no longer, because no one will listen more than 5 minutes of podcast right now. And using many different types of psychology inside, a little bit sarcasm, a little bit some parts of discussion between two historians, discussion in Arabic, of course. It has to be attractive for the audience in general. And I think we should be aware of the situation that we will believe that we do control the situation. No, we don't. I mean, we don't have a control on the information environment on the global south in general. We are losing it, including activity of Russian diplomacy, which is very actively corrupting media outlets. Long story to tell in general, but I think the modus operandi is very well known from KGB style mindset. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Cătălina, recently we were observing the highly complicated process of presidential elections in Romania, to say the least. Was there historical disinformation also involved in this process? And if not, what are the historical narratives designed for Romania?
If it was involved, yes, it was. The historical disinformation during the presidential election was a major part of the narratives that were amplified on social media, in general in the online environment. And in Romania, we have all sorts of disinformation narratives that have a great success. The one about distorting certain historical events, I think, have even a better success. And at our university, we try to do a research, and we do that every year. We try to find certain topics and how they are received, how Russian disinformation narratives are received by Romanians. And I was trying to think about what major topics we identified. The one, of course, about Ukraine, the narratives about the Ukraine doesn't exist, the identity of Ukraine never existed, and in a way, Russia is justified to do what it's doing. Another major topic was denying the Holocaust with references to anti-Semitic narratives, and I think it's again one of the most dangerous topic and narratives that we have. And the recent and the most prominent, I think, is the communist nostalgia narratives, and it's different of how it operates. It's not as usual tactics that we saw. We identified a network of social media pages connected to websites, and those pages, when you look at them, they don't promote nostalgia when you look at them one time. They promote recipes, gossips, zodiac, and after that, a few posts about nostalgia. And they are not clearly or directly promoting communism or how things were better then. They just ask you, do you remember those times, or you lived during those times, and that's all. They don't say anything else. And I think it's a new and a cognitive way of operating in this information field. And looking at surveys that also we conducted at our university in 2023, 1 year after the invasion of Ukraine, 30% of Romanians believe that Ukrainians are Nazis. 2025, recently, almost 56% of Romanians consider that during the communist times we lived better. And if you know how we lived, we didn't live better during those times. And people aged 18 to 29, 45% believe that communist times were a positive period for Romania. And almost half of Romanians think that, again, we lived better back then. So we have the narratives, we have the surveys showing us a dangerous amount of people believing in this narratives, and these are just a few examples that we have with data that we collected. And they are spread on social media, on, as I said, networks of pages, websites. They are, of course, promoted by political parties and one of the most prominent party in Romania, promote all these narratives. It's in opposition, but it's the first party in voting intentions in Romania. So that's the narratives, the actors that are promoting these narratives in Romania.
And do you have any narratives connected with also drawing attention to the memory conflicts with the neighbors of Romania?
It depends. Neighbors, of course, we can think about the issues in regards to Hungary, or we can think about more topics in regards to Republic of Moldova, which again, in Moldova, it's a different narrative that is promoted, because as we know, the narratives are crafted and they are tailored to respond, to answer certain specific features of each nation. And they are not the same in Romania or in Moldova or again in Hungary. So, but of course there are several, and again, the most prominent is about Ukraine, I would say, and probably the most successful, as we saw in surveys.
Okay, so going back to Mykola, how is Ukraine counteracting? Because in the beginning of war, of the full-scale invasion, because the war, of course, began way earlier, but Ukraine was very successful in raising international interest. There were a number of films showing its advantages against Russia and so on. And now we don't hear so much of it. That's also connected with the situation on the front. But do you know how Ukraine is acting against this kind of historical disinformation?
Well, I feel that Ukraine is quite successful in fighting of historical disinformation at domestic area, because probably it's easier. We recognize that we are in war, and of course some special measures should be applied, because à la guerre comme à la guerre. And we regret that this idea has not come yet to the minds of Europeans, because Europeans are also de facto in war with Russia. At least Russia believes it and pursues very specific policies which can be defined as hybrid war. And Europeans are considered as enemies. So it's time to recognize and to move to the policy of containment of Russia. Moreover, Russia very successfully benefits from rule of law in the West, from freedom of speech, freedom of information. At the same time, heavily constrain, heavily oppress all these freedoms at home. So I believe it's also time to say openly that you are not entitled to benefit from any freedoms internationally unless and until you secure the same freedoms at home. For your own citizens, only then you can claim, rule of law and whatever at the international area. So I believe something should be changed internationally here. In Ukraine, we have quite a good experience because, of course, the major sources of disinformation are closed. Still, of course, there are some problems with social media because they operate freely, openly, and of course we don't have enough resources to combat them. So in these cases, I believe that we have some advantages in terms of inventiveness, of creativity, because usually all this propaganda can be, maybe not always, but very often fought back by humor, irony, should be just ridiculed. It's probably the easiest way to disprove all these pathetic statements. I understand the change of mood internationally, because of course people are tired. Not only Ukrainians are tired, but for years of war, and this TV series are boring because every day you hear about some people killed, some cities destroyed. So every day, we have at least a few people are killed every day, civilians. It makes no news, absolutely. So it's another example of this epistemic injustice, epistemic violence, actually. But at the same time, people need to find, and so I also understand foreigners, they they need to find some justification for their passivity, for their neglect. They are tired, and they have to. And of course, it's very easy, very convenient to say, well, but you know, Ukraine is hopeless, Ukraine is corrupted, and something like this. Yes and no, you know, because in these statements we lose the main things of current development. Ukraine finally has functioning institutions which are able to fight corruption, which are able to fight against the top rulers in the country. We never had it before. Never. No, within the 30 years of independence, never we had institutions and law enforcement institutions which were able to withstand government pressure. Now we have it. It's a huge achievement. Of course, it's bad time for such developments, but nonetheless, it should be recognized. So I feel that, you know, there is a problem of communication. What I observe. Problem of communication in different countries, in most countries of Europe, in Poland, in Germany, because politicians can explain many things which are usually not explained. All the stories, for example, which I observe in Poland, for example, about huge, enormous assistance. You know, common people are impressed by the figures when they hear that, you know, Ukraine receives, you know, like billions and billions a year. Of course, these figures, you know, make people crazy. You know, billions. So that's my billions. You know, but if politicians are able to explain that these billions boil down to 1 cup of coffee every day for any European, it's not so big. You know, if you can stay without this coffee, 1 cup of coffee. And this is what these billions are translated in the level of common people. And there are many examples like this. So I believe that we should probably better communicate, and we should probably more introduce tougher measures against all kinds of Russian propaganda. We should not be afraid of accusation of censorship, of restrictions of freedom of speech. No, because they do this. They do the same in their country. Only those countries can enjoy freedom of speech internationally, which allows this freedom of speech domestically. It should be the rule.
Okay, thank you. Now, I would be interested to know more about the German scientific policy. Since you're the director of the network that deals with Eastern Europe, what are the goals, the main tools, strategies of the German political, scientific policy in this regard?
Yes, as I already told, I think looking from now, probably the creation of a German Historical Institute in Moscow had been a mistake, because the needs and interests of the other successor states of the Soviet Union hadn't been taken into account. When the institute was founded, we tried to counteract a little bit, because we had a big scholarship program inviting scholars from Ukraine, Belarus, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and other countries to study the history of their countries in the Moscow Central Archives. This mission became more and more difficult to fulfill after the annexation of Crimea and after the 2008, after the war against Georgia. And what we try to do now is to create a decentralized network of smaller research centers, in taking into account the different perspectives of people living in these countries or migrated to these countries. And we think that this would be good to decolonize our own perspectives and decolonize as well the topics of our research. And I hope that this will work out, because you know, for instance, in Georgia, the situation is very difficult at the very moment. But we try to do this, and we have still to persuade our foundation that this is a good idea, because they are still thinking a lot in these bilateral terms of the post-war situation. But we often, it's a kind of experiment for us, but we think that this is a good idea. But perhaps to for me, it would also be, if I may, important to stress another topic. If you're at Moscow Sheremetyevo Airport, at least it was so until 23, you see an exhibition that is called Россия беспредельная. That means Russian has no borders. And I think that's very important to understand, that this is a very distorted understanding of sovereignty, of Russian sovereignty. And this is much connected to this paradigm which had been introduced in 2020 of the genocide against the Soviet people, and the paradigm or the idea that Russia is not a nation. They did not succeed and create a Russian nation, but a civilization. And the civilization has no borders. And I think this topic of genocide, that is very, very important, because it legitimizes, for instance, the war against Ukraine, in pretending that the Russian state stands for the interest of the Russian-speaking Ukrainians, the Russian-speaking Germans in Germany, and Russian-speaking people all over the world. And that is very important to understand. And I think we have, and how important this is. After the last it's not an election, it's of Putin in 24, in his first speech, he pronounced that the falsification of history is a top priority. The second priority is a special military operation, how they called it, against Ukraine, but the war against the falsification of history. And this is very visible, because if you see who is responsible for that, this is the two Sergeys, Sergei Narishkin, who is the chief of the foreign intelligence services, and Sergei Kirienko, who is the curator of the occupied territories in Ukraine. And you see how much history, memory, and Russian so-called security interests are connected. Mm-hmm.
And it's all connected with the presidential palace, right? So now the next question goes to Mr. Basaj again. I've liked very much your comparison in one of interviews that you were speaking about imagining an aquarium where you put a tiny drop of ink every year or whatever, and then over time it starts to be dark, right? That's how disinformation works. So is it possible to make it the other way around and speak somehow to the Russian citizens? Do you try it?
Well, from this perspective, there was a good example about cognitive vulnerabilities of the audiences in general. So we should be aware of our own vulnerabilities about the way we interpret, we as humans in general, informations, and because the Russian model from psychological perspective excludes something like objectivism. It's mainly based on the pillar of subjectivism, so every targeted audience has its own subjective model of the perception of the history in the context of our common discussion. And so they do recognize this model, they do profile what kind of informations are most effective to this targeted audience, and then they do prepare the propaganda messages. they are in good enough quality, not always, but very often. So it's a good example how they mix this typical military psychological operation TTPs to civil propaganda effort, using different types of colors, depends about the region, about the even the time of year in general, differently in spring, differently in autumn, differently in winter. So this is the details, right? But from socio-technique, it's very important. And I think this is also one of the examples how we can split the differences between public diplomacy affairs of the West and Russian propaganda, which is using, from Western perspective, illegal TTP in communication, but from Russian perspective is absolutely legal and mainly based on Lipski and Lefebvre models of subjectivism, in fact. So it's about research from 30s and 50s. Answering your question, sir, about operations aimed at the Russian-speaking audience. It's quite difficult to answer because, first of all, it's not true that Russian information environment is bulletproof. Absolutely is not. I mean, Roskomnadzor is quite actively defending so-called the perception of the Kremlin in general. But this RUNET, as they call it, it's not like a closed castle. You can share the communiques. I think one of the example of effectiveness of such an effort was when Russians did down the MH17 flight, and there was a criminal investigation, and one of the part of the criminal investigation was appeal to witnesses, right? Of course, from the part of Russia, which was quite difficult to spread this message, this appeal to Russian-speaking audience. But we saw Western effort to support such a communication, and we saw also the activity of Roskomnadzor, probably Russian services, trying, to delete as much as they can or block as much as they can at the current time such information. But generally speaking, 15 or even 20% of such information packages survived in Russia. So it means that they are not bulletproof. I think one of the great example is common Ukrainian operations aimed at the perception of the war, spread to Russian audiences, very different ones. We see. I'm talking about these official ones, right? Attributed to the state, but we can identify also, including Telegram, some communication efforts trying to discredit political decisions and political perspective of Russia in Russia. But we do not see that this content affects the audience. So the question is not is it possible to get there, but how to get there to make this communication effective from our perspective. Because Russians are, for many reasons, do not interested in such a detailed and context messaging, and but answering for the operations abroad is easier. I mean, I don't remember if I have shared the example of Ambassador Kutrashev. No, it's a Russian ambassador in Iraq. He's a friend of Kadyrov, and he's very aggressively spreading anti-Polish and anti-Ukrainian propaganda on site. One of his main topic is to expose the picture of Russia war against Ukraine as an effort to defend Ukraine against Polish aggression. Right? So our effort to counter it was, of course, using this Arabic language web portals to decompose this narrative, to spread this materials through WhatsApp groups, etc. And on one of these WhatsApp groups, Kutrashev was present. So he became more aggressive, right? He just started to sending us some, from real life it wasn't scary, but he probably wants to intimidate, right, the group of experts that were working on the ground. From our perspective, it was a success because he was provoked, great. But how it affects on the wider public opinion? Because on these groups, there are also journalists, so they are reading such materials. They don't have to agree with our point of view, but if it's logically prepared, they invite Kutrashev to national TV station, and two of the questions that he was forced to answer was from our so-called our publications, right? So it's a tactical, just a piece of sand in general, right? But it shows that we can do something more, of course. What we need, more resources, and I'm not talking about the budget. I'm talking about the human resources in general on the ground. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think I can ask the last question now. Cătălina, you specialize, among others, in media and digital literacy. So, what should be done in Romania or Europe-wide in order to increase this literacy and make us better prepared against disinformation? Because that seems to be a crucial field in the years to come.
Yes, we hear frequently that media, digital literacy is the solution to the current problems, issues. And I started teaching media literacy in 2020. At that moment, I wasn't sure. I was working as a fact checker, and I didn't know what to expect from that. And we had to create from the beginning and materials, exercises, because we didn't know for sure how to teach media literacy, because it sounds good, it looks like it's a solution, but how to teach media literacy? Because you can't go in front of students and show them good sources, bad sources, or this is the reality, this is not. Because they may not trust you, they probably already have certain narratives that they believe in. And what do you do in this case? Especially when you have students, and in my case, that they already believe in certain distorted version of historical events. Do I have to teach them history, or do someone else has to teach them better, in this case, history? So in Romania, we introduced in the last few years 2 topics in 11 and 12 grades. One being the Jewish history, the Holocaust, and the second one being the history of communism in Romania. And as I said, they are in the 11 and 12 grades. They are mandatory, and that's one thing that we did. The problem is that I worked with teachers, and there are teachers teaching history that deny the Holocaust, or teaching that those that teach biology and they don't believe in certain vaccines, or they don't believe in treatments and deny science. Again, what do we do in this case? Because we already know from data that we have a lot of Romanians that stick to this or adhere to these narratives. And we did one thing, introducing these topics in schools, and the question again is how to teach media literacy and digital literacy when things change almost daily, in case of what narratives are promoted, actors, what channels, and you have to adapt almost, as I said, daily to teach, in my case, students or any age group, and not just teaching the general public, but also we have to think about who's going to teach media and digital literacy in schools, or not just in schools. So there are some questions and issues that I don't know for sure how we are going to solve, because at this point in Romania we don't have people that are, I think, competent enough to teach, and we also don't know for sure how to teach media and digital literacy, because there is no way. I think there are so many issues in this narratives and channels and how they are promoted and what we see in Romania. So.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I'm afraid we need to stop. I would love to speak to each of you way longer, but I guess this the geographical this disparity, the the fact that we have people from various countries, regions, is the value added here, even though we couldn't talk as long as we would like to. Now, having said that, I would like to open the questions. All right, gosh. So, maybe beginning with...
Thank you. Cezary Lusiński, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Department for European External Studies. I must admit that the task to counteract Russian narration is a difficult one. They're efficient, they broadcast their half-truths globally, they use the fragilities of people in particular regions. Say in Africa, they use the narration that they fight the colonialists. In countries like Moldova, they take care for the people who are not taken care by their own government. So they are efficient. They use the instruments that are difficult to cope with, like Telegram. We're not allowed in Polish diplomacy to use Telegram. I mean, it was a special permission only. Sometimes we must go to us difficult solutions as to counteract the narrative in Russian. Say in Moldova recently, that's my last sentence, there was a major battlefield prior to last parliamentary elections, and since the narration, counter-narration towards Russian narration was covered by Romanians in Romanian, so we were asked by say, the institutions of the European Union to do it in Russian, and so we did. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's collect a few questions from that row.
Michał Jock, German Historical Institute in Warsaw, and I have a question to Cătălina. If you could elaborate a little bit more about this, the survey where you said that the younger persons don't know anything about communism or don't treat it as bad, and this is understandably, I would say. I worked for some years as a teacher in Eastern Germany, and I had the same problem as a teacher. It was always, I had to teach the official history of the GDR from the perspective that it failed. And then I had the family memories, that everyday life was good and it was well, and it was not as bad as I presented. So I asked myself, how is it in Romania? How is it also among the older generations? Because we talked a lot about cyberspace and what we could do to counter this Russian narratives in the cyberspace, but we could also do something offline, speak with our children. I think that is very important, and we know from especially Polish history, during communism we had this official narration that exaggerated every communist effort done, and we had the family narratives also on the Second Republic, on the Second World War, which survived, which were a counter-narrative to the official narrative. So my question would be, what is... You talked that the teachers also don't want to teach it, deny it, and so on. But what about the parents, the great parents who actually lived through this time? Thanks.
Thank you. Yes.
Let's collect the questions. All right. Yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrew Tompkins from the German Historical Institute here in Warsaw. At various points in the discussion, I think you brought up propaganda or disinformation that succeeds through, for example, slick production, drowning out other narratives on social media, appealing to people through things like recipes, very indirectly, that sort of thing. If I recall from the historiography of propaganda, one argument, though, is that people tend to believe in propaganda because they want to, because it appeals to some of their grievances. For example, as East Germans who are unhappy with sort of economic and political transformation, people who blame the European Union, probably wrongly, for certain problems in their lives. How do you take this kind of argument into account? Do you think we have to kind of write these aggrieved people off and hope that they're overpowered by more sensible people receptive to our arguments, I guess? Do you find that there are ways to appeal to them? Thank you.
Okay, Beata Jurkowicz, Team Europe Direct. I have a question also to Cătălina. How important are NGOs, Romanian NGOs, in media literacy?
One more question?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Jan Musekam, Surprise, German Historical Institute. I have a question. I'm coming back to Mykola Riabchuk's idea that media is not presenting correctly or is leaving out the success stories of Ukraine, right? So when we hear every day ruins, war, destruction, we also get the idea that Ukraine is a failed state to some extent. So I was going to ask Kamil, Basaj, but also maybe Mykola Riabchuk, what can we do to have a more positive story and the news would kind of present the more positive aspects of what is going on. I mean, this is also a thing that we can observe in the election campaigns, right? When the opposition is bashing the European Union, but those who support the European Union can find a positive narrative in showing the successes. So that's largely missing across the board in European Union countries, and especially also in Germany, I would say.
Okay, so we can extend the debate by 10 minutes, so please answer very briefly and in depth at the same time.
Do I have to go first?
Yep.
Okay, so the question regarding the generations, I think it was one. We were also asking ourselves, the question with young people was how they perceive nostalgic, how they perceive communist era, and as I said, they were aged 18, 29, they didn't live through these times, and they think it was positive and good, and it was a good thing for Romania. We are asking also what were the sources of their information, and the family members also were the one that said probably to them that this, and in older generation we see the same thing. It's even more than 50%, it's almost to 70% thinking that good times were the communist, this is the data that we have. And in regards to the NGO questions, I think it was, I worked in an NGO and I'm still working in projects in an NGO, and we are in a way limited. We promote media literacy tools and digital literacy tools. We do trainings for teachers, for students, but it's for a small amount of people, I think. So the results are also limited because we don't do that for schools, for we don't have introduced that topic discipline in schools or in universities. So it's just some limited interventions that we have during our projects. And the questions, I think it was also about the social media pages that promote recipes, that promote zodiac, and also some religious narratives. They, in a way, they are constructed in that way to make you like those posts, and once you see the one that appeals to nostalgia, you don't even know that it's appealing to nostalgia, you just see, you like it, and in a way it transfers the appeals to emotions that you had from previous posts to the one that has nostalgic sentiments, appeals. So it's a very pervasive and very, very well designed, I think, strategy to promote, to make people think about how things used to be without saying too much. And if they used to be better, now it's worse. And in Romania, being part of the European Union, being part of all the Western partnerships, you don't even realize that from recipes and zodiac, you start thinking that it's not good living in European Union. So, thank you. I hope I wasn't too long.
I'll try to do my best to be as much precise as I can. So answering your questions or statement about effectiveness of propaganda, and people do agree with some theses. I would start with something which I think is important from our Western perspective in general, that the main goal of propaganda, understood from Russian perspective, is not to misinform someone, but to inspire someone to make a decision that will going to be on the benefit of someone who is conducting the operation. And I think this is one of the pillars how to understand how it can be effective, because it's well addressed and how it's addressed. And this is very important what our colleague from Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, that Russians are using vulnerabilities. And how? Because they do psychological profiling of the audiences. So why? Because it's necessary from psychological matrix. And this is something we do not do in general. And answering your question, sir, about the effectiveness of communication, I think the answer is very similar. I mean, there is no one targeted audience as a Europeans in European Union. The communication of European Union looks like it's targeting some abstract of the whole Europeans in general. But from the basics, it cannot be so effective because it's not enough adopted to the vulnerabilities, to the psychological layers of what kind of goals we would like to achieve. For example, if Russians are starting intimidation campaign, right, exposing a threat of Third World War, we should also adopt our communication as Europe in general, not only to every particular country, but also as a European Union in general. So we have a lack of communication efforts, in my opinion, and that's the answer. Thank you.
Would any one of you like to answer?
Yes, I'm extremely grateful. I'm a very old-fashioned historian, and it's very interesting for me to hear you. I think the basic problem is, from my old-fashioned perspective, is perhaps that Russia, with his propaganda, addresses identity problems and not so much practical problems of policy. And I think that it is why it is so dangerous and perhaps so catchy and not recognizable as Russian propaganda. And I think our task would be to include in our conversation more to persuade students and everybody we work with that we have to focus on practical political problems. And I think that probably is a hard task to do. And I think fact-checking, that is really difficult. But I remember when I was still in Russia in 2016, a film came out about the heroic deeds of the 28 Pamfilovцы. This is a Panzer brigade, a brigade which heroically fought against the Germans when they approached Moscow. But that brigade never existed, and Medinsky wrote a book about that, pretending that this is an historical fact. And a very important Russian historian stood up and told him that he should not engage in myth-making. This historian was forced out of his institution, and Medinsky answered to this challenge that it's not important if this is in a historical sense accurate or not, but this is a holy legend in which every real Russian is supposed to believe, and this is much more a question of loyalty, of identity, of the preparedness in belief. It's a question of belief and not so much a question of knowledge.
Mykola?
I appreciate in particular Dr. Muzikan's question or rather remark. Indeed, we have to pay more attention to some positive stories, and there are a lot of them. Actually, I don't monitor all the international mass media. I read mostly English language and Polish, occasionally French and German. But I must say that at least these media are pretty. They provide pretty good coverage of positive stories from Ukraine, especially like Guardian or New York Times or Wall Street Journal, Times. Basically, they do it. They do this job. They recollect various stories. They report also about new theater performances, about museums, which are overwhelmed today. Under these conditions, they still operate, and people are going there. It's absolutely not fair state because everything works in Ukraine. Trains run in Ukraine better probably than Germany. This is what my friends say. It's not my observation. It's my German colleagues say it. We have water, we have heating. It's not great, but we have still heating at homes. We have electricity, which is of course distributed in very limited way. But again, it's very well organized because we knew in advance a day earlier. We know when it will be switched off. So we can more or less plan our day because we know these hours when we have access to electricity. It's different every day, it changes, but still it's possible. So there are a lot of things, and of course all these administrative services, they are provided. So, but it relates not only to daily life, because it's really impressive, when you see this tickets sold out to the theaters for many days ahead, and not overwhelmed hosts, because there are restrictions. They cannot be overwhelmed because they cannot sell out more tickets than there are places underground in the shelter. So opera theater sells only 400 tickets instead of 1,000 something, But nonetheless, and of course this relates also to historical issues, because in Polish-Ukraine case there are a lot of positive things historically, starting from Cossacks fighting with alongside Sobieski in Vienna, and to this role of Ukrainians in fighting Bolsheviks in 1920. So there are a lot of things which can be reported and emphasized. But the last point which relates to everybody, I fully recognize the importance of all these historical issues and the importance of our response. We have to fight back all this Russian propaganda, disinformation, in particular on historical issues. But nonetheless, at the same time, we have to remember and to remind our interlocutors, to our audiences, that this is basically it's not the most important issue, because Russia uses all these debates in order to detract our attention from the key points. And the key point is that Russia violated a number of international agreements. Russia violated international law. So it doesn't matter whether Ukraine is new state, non-existent state, does this nation exist or not. It exists because it's a member of United Nations. That's all. And there were like 5 or 6 agreements with Russia about peace, friendship, and blah blah blah. They violated all these agreements, and this is the main problem. Regardless of all these historical issues, which are important, but they should not detract our attention from the main point. Whether you like Ukraine or not, whether you recognize it a nation or not, Russia violated the international law, and this is the main point.
Thank you. I guess that's the right sentence to finish the debate. We exceeded the time, so I will not make any concluding remarks. Please forgive me. I would like to thank for all the questions. I would like to thank the Polish Institute of International Affairs for hosting us here and co-organizing the whole event, and especially Anna Maria Dyner for helping us. And above all, I would like to thank our keynote speaker and the panelists, and I hope that we will have a chance to meet again. Thank you very much.